Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bookish Hour. I am Sarah Burr, author of the Trending Topic Mysteries, the Glenmire Wim Mysteries, the Court of Mysteries series, and the upcoming Book Blogger Mysteries.
Yes, and those are all fabulous, by the way, folks, in case you didn't know. And I am J.C. Kenney, and I am the author of the Ellie Cobb Mysteries, the Darcy Dawn Mysteries, and the upcoming Elmo Simpson Mysteries. And, you know, Sarah, it's Thursday night. It's been a week. I think it's time to get bookish. We need some books.
I think we definitely do. And as you said, JC, it has been a bit of a week. We do want to kind of pause before we get into our show and just take a moment to recognize the state of the world at this point in time. For those of you who know about my background, I lived in Maine for nearly 20 years. So the news coming out of Lewiston from last night has been very jarring and incredibly sad. And while, you know, there's really what can we do to help and support during this time, we always kind of feel very helpless. And JC, you made a poignant comment before we started the show about this is the second time since we've been doing the Bookish Hour where we have been broadcasting on the evening of a mass shooting. And it's unfortunate that that's what our reality is, and we can only offer our support to the people that are hurting. I know that we have viewers who live in Maine. I hope that you're staying safe, and we really hope for a swift resolution to what's going on there. I've been doing some digging on the internet, and we were able to locate a Victims Fund fundraiser. And if you have a moment, have the time, Victims First is an organization. It's actually families from previous mass shootings who have banded together to support those who are going through the pain of what folks in Lewiston are dealing with. So if you have a moment to stop by, I know that they would appreciate it. So again, Maine viewers, stay safe. Our thoughts are with you. And I hope we can bring a little levity tonight and take folks' minds off of the troubles that are going on in the world. You'll notice that tonight it is just JC and I. We're here for a fabulous discussion on all things mystery. We're going to be talking about our books. We're going to be talking about books that we love, especially as mysteries through the ages. And hopefully you guys will hear some books that you're not familiar with, so you have something to add to your reading list. And please share the mysteries that have touched your lives as we kind of go through our episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I just want to echo what Sarah said. You know, we want this show to be something that you leave with a happy heart, especially in times like we are going through right now where there are a lot of heavy hearts. So thank you all for being here. And, you know, Farmhouse Reader, Mizan, you know, thanks for already checking in. And like Sarah said, as Sarah and I are going to go through some of our faves through the years, let us know what you like, you know, because, you know, as you can see, yeah, I got a few books behind me. Sarah's got a bunch of books too. But, you know, hey, like we always say, we're readers and we're readers too. And so if you've got some recommendations, you know, share them. You know, it's all good. The more books, the better.
There can never be too many books.
No, absolutely not. So without any further ado, I don't know. Anyway, it's Thursday night. Kind of what Sarah and I wanted to do when this opportunity came up is, like she said, is we just kind of want to talk about, as mystery authors, some of the books that have really influenced not only our writing as authors, but just influenced us as readers, maybe stayed with us. And, we don't want to get too, didactic or well, this book influenced Western culture or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and start off here. And I don't know if you can see it, but this is my copy of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And, to me, this is one that really means a lot in my house because my older kiddo, Shay, read these. And I think a lot of, most scholars, even though I said we weren't going to talk about scholars, agree that Edgar Allan Poe wrote the first detective story. I think a lot of mystery fiction starts with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Holmes. So I just kind of wanted to, shout that out as kind of a starting point. This is so much fun. And I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about reading it is, the fact that it's short stories. And, as an author, one of the things that it helps me is think about things like, setting, because, whether it's Holmes's apartment that's always a wreck, or, greater London, things like that. So anyway, I'd imagine most, if not all of our readers have had some exposure to the many adventures, not only in paper form, but also on TV, movies, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that is my first recommendation.
I think what you mentioned, JC, about, people have been affected or have at least had some type of interaction with Sherlock Holmes at some point in their life. Mm-hmm. In preparing for this episode, I got to think, okay, when was I actually introduced to Sherlock? And for me, it was actually through the critically acclaimed Disney film, The Great Mouse Detective.
That is a great one. Yes.
I absolutely loved that as a kid. And I actually recently watched it while I was stuck on a plane for quite a while. And as an adult, now knowing more about Sherlock and having read his stories, and watched the different variations that I've seen through the years, it was really interesting to see how Sherlock Holmes is actually incorporated into Basil of Baker Street, because he's the mouse that's living underneath Sherlock, and you see Sherlock playing his violin in the window. And there are all of these little things throughout the movie that I was like, oh my gosh, as a kid, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I was fully invested in these mice. But to know the world that actually came from as an adult, I thought that was extremely fun. And when you said about setting and how atmospheric things are in Sherlock's world, one story that always stood out was The Hound of the Baskervilles. And I was just I think that's probably my favorite Sherlock story, just because of the setting and just how, you could just feel being there. And I think that's always been a standout for me.
Yeah. And Shay Kenney, I may know them a little bit, but I'm not going to go into any details other than Shay's going to be joining us in a few weeks to talk graphic novels. So that's going to be really cool. But Shay commented that Great Mouse Detective is one of their favorite movies of all time, and it's so clever. And if anybody hasn't watched it, I didn't see it the first time around because I was kind of too old when it first came out, but I watched it when the kids were little. And so one of the things that was so much fun was Ratigan being voiced by Vincent Price. Oh, and guess what? We're less than a week from Halloween. What's more perfect than Vincent Price at Halloween? So there we go. See, we're all connecting all the dots here.
That's a good connection. When I watched it again, I was just like, oh wow, there's just so much in this movie that I really, really enjoyed. And then kind of taking us through the great influencers of mystery. Of course, we have Agatha Christie, and I know that she has kickstarted a lot of our own writing careers just because we were so fascinated by her work and what she was able to do. And I know that many of my mysteries that I have written are the locked room puzzle that she was just so deft at creating. So I'm curious, what would you say, JC, what are some of the standout Christies for you?
I right here. as a matter of fact. This is my favorite.
Evil Under the Sun.
Evil Under the Sun. And I realize that a lot of people consider The Murder of Roger Ackroyd to be the most, possibly the greatest mystery whodunit of all time. And I read that. I loved it. But for me, I don't know. I just really, Evil Under the Sun is my favorite. I go back to when I was 15 years old, though, and freshman in high school, we all were assigned various books to read, and that year, and one of them was, and then there were none. And so that's where I often go back to telling my mystery author story. That's where it began for me as far as books go. With that one, 10 Little Indians. We are not going to use the terrible name, but and then there were none. That's the first whodunit I can say that I definitely read. And then I'm sure a lot of you who have hung out with us before here on the show know my mom was a huge fan of especially Agatha Christie and some of those others. So her books were around the house all the time. So if I would ever make a single recommendation for a book, and I'm sorry, but Mark just kind of piped in, and then there were none. It could be argued was the first slasher story. So again, perfect for Halloween. I think that's a great one to introduce somebody to the brilliance of Agatha Christie. One of the other things, though, I would say is that Murder at the Vicarage is one I would recommend. So you get to meet Miss Marple. Oh, the satire and the cutting dialogue in that book is just beyond brilliant. And then, for Poirot, yes, it's easy to say Murder on the Orient Express or Death on the Nile, but, for my money, this one. And I was actually chatting with some folks that the Peter Ustinov 1980, I think 82 film, where he played Poirot, is really, really good too. So that's my Christie recommendation. What about you, Sarah?
I'm going to always date myself with how I am introduced to books that I guess are from a time ago, because my first interaction with Agatha Christie was actually through the video game adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express. And I played through this video game and was so thoroughly confused. I was having to do cheats and walkthroughs to be how do I figure this out? How is this detective guy putting everything together? But then at the end, you have the kind of decision of, how did this crime actually happen? And then you see this elaborate scheme unfold. And I was just enthralled. And once I realized oh wow, this is based on a book, I dove into Christie. And for some reason, the one that always stands out most in my mind is A Pocket Full of Rye. And I think the reason, one, I liked the dynamic of Inspector Neil and Miss Marple, because he actually invites her to help him and understands that she can actually be of some use in his investigation, where often you don't necessarily get that with an amateur sleuth. But I just I love riddles. I love when there are built-in clues based on things that we're already familiar with. So the fact that you have the nursery rhyme that is kind of driving all of these deaths that are occurring is just, I just thought that was the most brilliant thing ever, to take something that already existed in the form of a nursery rhyme and come up with this elaborate murder plot around it. That's one that's always stuck in my mind as and of course and then there were none is, I think, one of my favorite ones to see adapted into film or into a TV show. I think just the nuances of all the different characters is always fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Just a couple of comments. Shay chimed in again to say, in fairness, that video game is really hard. And there's a new one coming out, I guess, a new video game, Orient Express. So that's going to be cool. And Mizanne mentioned she just read Murder at the Vicarage. So good job. Way to go. Yeah, I think, and I forgot where I was going to go other than, with The Pocket Full of Rye, it also, that's one that was so interesting because it was also so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that she being Christie did so well, and you know, mystery and whodunit authors, who are really gifted, have that ability to not only make us feel relieved, happy when the murderer is caught, but also pull that feeling of sympathy or sadness when you realize not only just, okay, well, people died and that's sad, but you really get to know in in a short period of time, you get to feel for all these people. And I just think that's a great one to really pull that out of the reader, the way with the twist at the end. It's like, oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, and but even from like and knowing the people that are involved in the crime, where you can actually find yourself feeling bad for these people who have done something terrible just because of the circumstances they're around, and it really humanizes the fact that we all have these demons within us. And that one I absolutely, I read it, I don't know, 15-20 years ago at this point, and it's just like how it stayed with me for so long.
Yeah. And that's interesting you mentioned that, because that's one of the reasons that Evil Under the Sun is my personal favorite, because the murderer, villain, bad guy, whatever you want to say, that really threw me for a loop. If you haven't read it, folks, I'm not going to give it away, but it was like, that's when I learned, I read about this before about Christie, that Christie there were no sacred cows in her writing. I don't know if that's appropriate to say anymore, but basically anybody was fair game. It didn't matter if you're rich, poor, old, young, whatever. Anybody could be the victim and anybody could be the murderer. And it really hit me with Evil Under the Sun in the book adaptation. Movies have kind of gone a little bit differently, which that's another matter of, okay, well, good movie adaptations, bad movie adaptations, but it was that's the way Evil Under the Sun was with me. It was like, after reading it's like, it just stays with me.
And you had mentioned that in reading And Then There Were None was kind of your first like induction into the possibilities of creating a mystery and writing a mystery. Someone who did that for me, that and we've been to several conferences by now, and it's a name that I don't normally hear in the mystery setting, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like, to me, I think she's the queen of mystery, and Mary Higgins Clark. My first experience with her was, I'm pretty sure I was in third grade, and we were in the waiting room of a hospital. And someone had left one of her books just like on like a side table, and my mom started reading it to me. And of course I forget the name of which one it is, but it begins with the woman being trapped in a coffin. And so we're like in the hospital, like, oh, like this doesn't really, like, this probably isn't the best thing to be reading at this point. But, I was like, oh, like, why is somebody in a coffin? And she hears like a bell dinging overhead. And fast forward a couple years later, and I discovered Mary Higgins Clark at my library and was reading. I was obsessed with her writing style, even though I could really figure out like who the killer was after I kind of got used to how she presented her plot. But to me, that helped me understand the writing process. And it's like, okay, like this is how you set up a mystery and how a story unfolds. And the one that I think that I began with was Loves Music, Loves to Dance. And it's one where the killer is finding these women through personal ads, and me being like a pre-tween, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I love romance. And then it's like, oh, and throw in some murder in here and it's great. But I mean, I've read her books since I was 12, and the ones that she has worked, or that she worked with Alifair Burke, were really fun. With I forget what the I know that the main character's name was Lori, but it was a woman who was doing these investigations as part of like a cold case investigation review.
Mhm.
And it was the first time that in her book she had kind of like the same people carrying through and so you got to see them develop and everything. And she's someone that I've always loved her work, and she really taught me how to structure a mystery.
Yeah. As far as like story structure and things like that with regard to the mystery, again, I go back to Christie. And that's one of the reasons that I've found so interesting with her stories is they're so, I mean, if we want to be fancy, they're so written so tightly, but they're short. They're not long. She doesn't screw around, or she didn't screw around. And that's one of the things I found with my stories, is that they all, I think my longest mystery is probably my first Ellie Cobb mystery, A Literal Mess, which came in about 74,000 words. My Darcy Gone mysteries, they all clock in right around 65 or 70,000. And I think it's because I've read so much Christie, and it just kind of by osmosis, that influence of, let's just keep it as, within reason, as bare bones as possible. And so she's probably the one, again, that I have to go back to as far as, that influence that, yes, I'll never be able to write as well as she did. But, when learning, kind of how to put things together, again, I go back to her.
I think that the pacing that you mentioned is, how I try to solve my tendency to, we've had like a lot of upheaval in this book, like let's just take a break and have a chill moment with our characters, and then you get readers that are like, I want there to be action all the time, or I don't want them talking about anything but the mystery. And it's like, finding that balance where, you're always moving the story forward, but you do get some reprieve from your characters so that they can enjoy their life a little bit. And my solution to that is I just usually most of my books are solved within like 4 days. My sleuths don't wait around for anything. And it's just like, we have to move from day to day to day, because if there is like that, I waited a week to do something, it's like, oh man, I'm going to go off on a tangent, and this thing is going to go off the rails. Which I have done. I feel like my mysteries, I just actually finished writing the first draft of the third Glenmire Whim mystery today. Woo! Which, can't believe it happened. I wasn't expecting to be done by the end of the month, so I'm really excited that I checked that off my list. But I'm clocking it in right now at 68,000 words. I'm like, ooh, usually mine are like in the 90s when I do that first, big, just brain dump into a manuscript. So I'm really excited to be able to kind of work on ways to beef up this particular novel, especially since I decided to change who my killer was within the last 30 pages of the book. So I have to do a lot of retweaking to get everything to add up correctly.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool. That's one of the things that's interesting for me to hear, because what I find when I write, and not to get, too bogged down in craft here, but not to do it, but, what I always find with my story, my first drafts usually are anywhere between low to upper 60,000s. And so that's where I find with me, I end up for my subsequent revising and things like that, my story gets a little bit longer. And I've come to realize that's just the way I write. And because for me, it's that getting that story down, getting it on paper. And it's like, don't worry about it. Because to your point, I do believe there is value in, within reason, adding some whether you want to call it character or background, giving our sleuth and their friends a chance to breathe and be, have a moment. And so then as I go through multiple rounds of revision, that's where that stuff comes in. And so then I end up kind of with the final product. But I do also want to say a shout out to DHB, who mentioned Lord Peter Wimsey. And I think with his stories by, oh my goodness, in her name, just escaped me, who wrote the Lord Peter Wimsey stories.
Oh, God.
Dorothy L. Sayers.
There we go.
I think, with Wimsey, that's a perfect example because he, this man of leisure and all that kind of stuff. And yet you learn that even though he's a lord, that he's got a lot going on in his life. So I think that's a perfect example. If you haven't read them, folks, Dorothy L. Sayers, and her life is really, really interesting also. She's quite the modern woman. Had her own job, all this kind of stuff. And so definitely not your stereotypical woman having to live at home during the 30s and 40s. So anyway.
I think so with your, we've obviously been talking a lot about Christie and her influences on our writing. And I don't know if I consider her books cozy. And she's often referred to as like the mother of the cozy mystery, and I know there are parts of her books that do have those same cozy vibes, but to me, like it's just like a different level, I guess, of what cozy mysteries have really kind of evolved into. So I would love to kind of pick your brain about what our genre is today, of who are the books or the characters or the authors that really inspired you or even like got you hooked on this genre of amateur sleuths that have kind of a niche or unique job, live in a small community, are a small town, a small neighborhood. Who are the people that really kind of brought you into the modern cozy?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say my own opinion about Christie, she was a cozy author among other things, because I think when we talk about in general the tropes of cozy mysteries, we're talking about an amateur sleuth, small town. The murder is typically committed off the page. You get to know folks. You see recurring characters, a lot of those kind of things. The community becomes a character in and of itself. And I think that's the Miss Marple stories to a T. Now, I think it's fair to say Poirot, he's a detective.
He is, yes.
So those are PI, and then you have like the Colonel Race and some of the others. So, to me, I think Christie, some of her stuff is cozy. As far as like authors now who I love to read, and I will mention this Sarah E. Burr right here is one with and this one of the things I always like to shout out about your Jax series is that she's in effect a queen. She's not technically a queen because she's a duchess, but she's an amateur sleuth, and she solves these mysteries. And it's in kind of that fantasy setting. So I think that's a lot of fun because I've read throughout my life tons of science fiction and fantasy. So that's a lot of fun too. A couple other folks I'm going to mention here real quick. I think Ellen Byron is just an absolute genius. I love Ellen to death. She's written, this is her vintage cookbook series, the first one. She's written a couple other series, and I think that Ellen does a fabulous job of showing us the small communities. And even with the vintage cookbook series being based in New Orleans, it's a small community within that larger city. And I think Ellen is another one who's fabulous. I could go on and on. One of the things, though, I do want to shout out is kind of an unexpected person with regard to kind of the amateur sleuth cozy mystery is one of my all-time favorite entertainers of all time, Jimmy Buffett. Because not only was he a wonderful singer and an amazing storyteller, he was a great author. In this book, Where is Joe Merchant? This is basically, it's not a cozy mystery, but it features an amateur sleuth trying to find somebody who's missing. And this has been a great influence on my upcoming Elmo Simpson books. So I have to shout out Jimmy because I miss him, and it's going to be a long time for me to get over losing him. I could go on and on. I've got, a bunch of other folks here that I could mention as far as cozy influences today. But I'll stop there because I don't want to dominate. And Sarah, who are some of yours?
I think my first brush with the cozy mystery genre was Joanne Fluke, and Hannah Swenson, because I vividly remember checking out the Blueberry Muffin Murders from the library and thinking, wow, this is really cool that a baker could solve a crime. And, this again, I was probably 13, 14 years old. And I kind of forgot that those types of books existed, even though I loved Nancy Drew more than life itself and was just fully immersed in what Nancy Drew was doing. Again, I was also playing the Nancy Drew video games during this time. But it wasn't until, and this was 2017 when we moved from Boston to the New York area. And I was kind of going through this like big transition, didn't have any friends in the area. We're like, what did we just do? We just uprooted our lives. What's going on here? And we went to the local Barnes and Noble and I picked up Little Shop of Homicide by Denise Swanson. It was the first book in her Devereaux's Dime Store Mysteries. Changed my life. Denise Swanson is she is my idol in this genre. Everything that she has written, I absolutely love. There was something about that series though, that just it made me feel like, okay, I'm not alone. Everybody has these moments in their life where they kind of have to start over. Luckily I wasn't starting over alone by myself. So I already had an up on a lot of these, the cozy mystery heroines that I encountered. But her friend group with Boone and I think it's Piper is the name of Dev's friends. And all my books, JC, I love my trio. I love having my Nancy, Bess, and George, and meeting the characters in the Devereaux Dime series. It was oh my gosh, these are those guys grown up. And devoured the whole series, moved on to her Scumble River series, her Chef to Go. I absolutely idolize her. And to know that now, in this community that she helps celebrate when my books come out is just it's one of those moments where it's I cannot believe that I have gotten here, because her books were what I aspired to. And those, they really helped me. And I think that was where I was wow, the power that these books can have, that cozy mysteries can have. And I know that we have talked about, and even when we had Ellen on the show and talking about how there's, sometimes the stigma of cozies and people being oh, well, cozy mysteries aren't real mysteries. And it's they're real mysteries and more, because they're giving just so much to the reader. They're giving this community that the reader is welcomed into. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. So Denise Swanson is just right up there. I love Julia Buckley's The Writer's Apprentice series. That was one that from just a creative standpoint, that I loved. I love the idea of an author, especially a famous author, because I love celebrities in my books too. I love having that celebrity sparkle. And I love the idea of a celebrity author solving mysteries, but how Julia does it is they're ghostwriting together. And because they're looking for a new author to take over this woman's series. And they just make such a great team. Absolutely. Those are the ones that got me hooked. And then once I began discovering it, the world just opened up for me. And I want to shout out your Alley Cobb mysteries, because I don't think we talk about them enough for what they do. You really began exploring mental health from a cozy mystery standpoint. And I know that I have really taken that to heart as a writer, and have tried to share that in my own work too, because I think it's really important. These sleuths are running into death all the time, and you can't just flip the page and they kind of, oh, let's go on our merry little way. And I just think that the way that Allie really processes the world around her is not only relatable, but just so important to the humanity that we're trying to share in these fictional stories.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that was, yeah, I'll admit, because at the end of book 3, Allie takes a really dark turn. And that's when she finally realizes that she needs some help. And that was a way for me to kind of share a little bit about my story, about my challenges with mental health, and kind of the opportunity to let folks know, hey, you're not alone. And one other thing I want to kind of mention is one author, Tammy Kaler. And this book isn't great because the cover is a little dark here, but this is she wrote a 5-book series called the Kate Riley series. And Kate Riley is a race car driver. And so each book takes her in a different form of race car to a different track throughout North America. And one of the things that I really think that this is for those of you who know, this, and those of you who don't know, I'm a huge IndyCar fan. I love auto racing. But one of the things that I think this series does, as far as the cozy mystery genre, is it really kind of helps expand the world of where cozies can happen. This is a woman who drives a race car. I'm not trying to say that our traditional bookstore, baking shop locations, that those are fabulous. But I think what Tammy Kaler is the author, if you're not familiar with her. What she does is it takes the cozy mystery genre into a completely new world. And I think that was one of the things that really helped open my eyes to the fact that, a cozy mystery, it is, we have kind of these rails that we follow, but at the same time, if we give ourselves the opportunity to be creative, which we should because we're writers, those rails can be really wide. And so that's something that I wanted to mention Tammy also. And, I apologize, folks. We've had so many wonderful comments here from folks. Mizanne mentioned she loves Hannah Swenson, the chocolate chip cookie murder. She first read it in 2021. Mark Baker. Mark's been reading Joanne's books. He also loved the Writer's Apprentice. Shay mentioned Castle. Castle's a great one. A lot of fun. There's a graphic novel, or there are comics of Castle also. And so anyway, that's kind of, I just kind of wanted to mention, keep the comments coming, folks. That's you are our special guest tonight.
and I to speak to David, who had said the interesting thought about the role of community in cozy mysteries. I think to what you were saying, JC, about with the series kind of expanding the community that Tammy's main character is a part of. I think it goes to show the importance of character in the cozy mystery genre, and how, yes, the mystery is driving the plot, but also our characters are driving the series and bringing our audience along on their journey. And I know that I personally am really excited to at least have Coco go somewhere else outside of Central Shores and have something happen, just because once you have your little group of my sleuth squad, then the world is their oyster when it comes to getting into trouble. So I think that it's yes, there is something to be said about revisiting places that we know and love, but also exploring new areas with our main characters is really fun and exciting. And I think that's probably why most of the time when I am writing a book, I will have a couple stops off at places that people are familiar with, but then a majority of the action is always happening in a new store or a new event space or a new restaurant, to have, that new community expand even more. Yeah.
And, which is a perfect segue to the next author I want to mention, who didn't write cozy mysteries as such, but we couldn't have a conversation without mentioning legendary Sue Grafton. I got turned on to Sue Grafton by my wife, Nancy. Nancy's read all the books, all A to Y. I haven't read all of them, but to your point, we come to care about Kinsey, and about the funny little man who lived next door. And again, it's that community that Kinsey has. It's small, and she's a bit of a wreck and all that kind of stuff, but still you come to care about her. and you come to know a little bit about the community. But again, she takes us to different places, whether it's in Southern California, Northern California, and that's just another example of how the character, and whether it's the character themselves or the found family or that teeny tiny small community really becomes part of our lives.
Yeah, I think, and just to say the magnitude of A to Y, 25 books. The when I hear about authors who are hitting their 25th book, or they've been able to produce that much great content for the world, it's not only is the story itself engaging and inspiring, but just the overall journey is just incredible to really witness. And it always amazes me when I hear the how many stories that people have inside their heads. And I can only hope that I can have like a little bit more, because I love what I do, and I love this, being able to come up with these puzzles for people to solve. But it's really just it's an amazing gift to see people share in the world.
Yeah, and I think for her, for Sue Grafton to have all of those be the same character. Now, obviously, things changed over time, because that's one of the things I found in my writing. Like with my Allie Cobb series, I ended it after 6 books for a number of reasons that ended up happening. But also, I thought by the time I got to 6, it was like, okay, I am about out of ideas, because to your point, I wasn't ready to take Allie on the road anywhere. And I thought, okay, I think Allie in the small town of Russian Creek, Indiana, 6 stories, 6 murders in this small community, that was enough for me. That well had run dry. And, when I think about somebody, whether it's Sue Grafton, Janet Ivanovich, some of these others like Denise Swanson, when they're able to, give us new stories that go into, 2 digits, it's just really, it is incredible, because those stories continue to feel fresh and engaging and fun, and they don't get stale, which I think is that's just a magnificent talent.
I got an email from the woman who narrates my Court of Mystery series, and we're working on the audiobook for book 9, which, if all things go according to plan, there's only going to be one more book in the Court of Mystery series where Jax is the lead. And my narrator, Melissa, who is, I told her, she has no idea how much she has influenced me as a writer and as a storyteller, and what effect that her performances have had on some of my characters. The plot items that have changed because I have grown attached to her performances over the years, I think would shock some readers, because there were some people who were meant to be killed off that weren't killed off. There were relationships that happened that weren't meant to happen. And it was just like, to have her influence, I think, is just, when I think about it, it's like, wow, like it's interesting to see that reflected in your work. But she had sent me a message about, what am I going to do when, if there's only one more of these, like, how am I going to deal with not having these characters in my life? I'm like, that's a really great question, because I haven't even figured out how I'm supposed to wrap this all up in one book. Because, I know where I want the story to end, at least from a kind of arc standpoint, but like, I'm not ready to say goodbye to Jax and Perry and George and the realm of virtues itself. And so I'm kind of regretting my finite, this is going to be a 10-book series. So I'm hoping to leave the door open for more adventures at that point. But it's very daunting to think about when you aren't ready to say goodbye. And yeah, that's one of the fun things, I guess, that when you are immersing yourself in these worlds, that you grow attached, and I'm scrambling to keep them alive as long as I can.
Yeah, because I tell you what, as far as Jackson Company go, I know how I want everything to end, but I'm just the reader, so I'm just along for the ride. So, I guess, I hate this because it's as we always say, we only got 15 minutes left. This has been a blast. I do want to kind of mention a couple other folks here, a couple other genres that I think are a lot of fun, because one of the folks that I want to mention is Tracy Clark. And she writes the Cass Raines mysteries. And it's not so much cozy mystery because Cass is a former police officer who works as a private investigator in Chicago. And the reason I wanted to mention Tracy is a woman of color, an incredible, incredible author. And I think one of the things that I think the mystery genre has done, and the writing community that writes mystery has done a pretty good job of in recent years, has been to work very hard to be more inclusive of folks who aren't straight and white, and to be honest. And if you've not read Tracy, her Cass Raines books are amazing. We've got Kelly Garrett, Naomi Hirahara, friend of the show, Jen Chow, who she's going to be stopping by next February probably to talk about her latest book. So many folks that, we could shoot, Sarah, you and I, we could spend, we could do a 24-hour marathon talking about all of the books that we really, love. But is there anybody else that you want to kind of send a specific shout out to?
Oh man, I think I do have to follow up my Mary Higgins Clark shout out with Carol Higgins Clark. Her Regan Riley mysteries were ones that I listened to on audiobook when I was driving back and forth from college. And the thing that I always found to be really fun with her writing was, she invokes so much of her mom in her mysteries, but Riley was, she was just such a defined character, and she was someone that carried throughout the entire series. Whereas with Mary Higgins Clark, it was you were getting new characters for every book, and I loved the decked, mobbed, all the names. They were just like one verb, and it was just I really enjoyed her writing. I guess this is more in a line with the fact that Halloween is right around the corner. It's, I think, probably more suspense and psychological terror than mystery, but The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchinson, I have no idea how this book got on my radar. It was one of those ones that I opened my Kindle and was like, oh, what's this book? How did I get it? And started reading it and was terrified, mortified, but just so engrossed in the story about these missing girls and what happens to them. That one has stayed with me for quite a while. And then I think the last book that I think really threw me for a loop, where I got to the end and I was like, wow, I'm going to be thinking about this for a while, was Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinnaborough. And I believe that there's a Netflix series about this. I haven't seen it because the book is just in my mind as being this masterpiece that I haven't watched it. And I don't want the vision of the book to be marred by what may or may not be a good or bad adaptation. But that book, oh my goodness, the ending was jaw-dropping. I had to read it a couple times to make sure that I understood it, because it was just so oh, I can't believe that this is how this book ended. And I think that's the last time that I've been very floored by how a book ends. And it's probably because I don't necessarily like to read a lot of books that I'm oh my gosh, I'm going to be dwelling on this for weeks on end. I like my happy endings. So that one, if you're in for something really twisted, Behind Her Eyes will definitely deliver. Yeah.
Well, and the hour couldn't go by for me without mentioning, for me, my birthday buddy, Elmore Leonard. We're both born on October 11th. I wouldn't be a mystery writer if not for Elmore Leonard, because while I go back, no doubt Agatha Christie influenced me in so many ways, from the craft of writing to the love of mystery. But man, Elmore Leonard, the way he can write and bring out characters who aren't likable, and yet you're rooting for them, and you're turning the page. And if it wasn't for Elmore Leonard, I wouldn't be writing my Elmo Simpson books, which you're all just gonna have to wait till next September for that. I have to send a shout out to him. Absolute genius of crime fiction. Not cozy by any means, but just absolutely brilliant writing all the way around.
There's another question that I have, JC, and you actually said it before we hopped online. But in regards to the books that we have written, what would you say is your personal favorite of the stories that you've created, and maybe one that you kind of look back on and you're like, whoa, what was I doing? I struggle with that a little bit. One of the things I will say is A Literal Mess, the first Ali Cobb book. That is the one that was hit #1 on both Amazon for Kindle, on Kobo, and on Nook. So I think that one, if you haven't read it, folks, you need to. So you're part of the in crowd among everybody who has read it. However, I feel that the best book I've written so far was Ali Cobb #4, A Deadly Discovery. That's the one that involved a cold case 20 years from where a girl disappeared 20 years ago, and involved some DNA search. And I personally thought that was the best book I ever read. I cried it when I wrote the ending of that one, just because that's one I'm really the most proud of. If there's one that it's like, I'm not all that crazy about, it would probably be, I'm looking up at my wall where I have those books. Probably maybe it was The Sophomore Slump, #2, A Genuine Fix. It was okay. I think it's probably the weakest of all my mystery novels that have come out. So that's kind of, as far as my 2 Darcy Gone books that have both come out, I'm very pleased with both of those. Those were so much fun to write because of all the music references. But yeah, I'd say probably Ali #1, Literal Mess, the most popular. Ali #4, Deadly Discovery, I think is the best. And Genuine Fix, while I still think it's a good book, it's the one I probably think is the weakest of all. How about you? I feel like I have a lot that I'm very critical of looking back on just like how to tell a story, and like in regards to kind of plotting where I'm going. Definitely a lot of my early Court of Mystery, the novellas that I wrote, where I didn't know what I was doing, and I just wanted to see if I could publish a book, and I did, and I was like, okay, like I figured that out, but how do I make it better? And so as I've gone through that series, like just you can see by leaps and bounds, like, wow, this girl has no idea what's going on, to, oh, like she can put a mystery together. And so, I mean, there are a lot of my Jack's mysteries that I'm very proud of because of the fact that it does take place in like this fantasy realm, and I get to manipulate, alchemy and use like poisons that I've made up that I find to be really fun. But I think that my favorite mystery that I've written was probably Ravaged Rain, which takes place, it's very adventurous, and it's, Jax and her friends, they're like in the middle of a jungle. There's like this big temple, and we've got the warrior women that are they're like there's like a religious group that they protect. And I was just like, I just loved all of the woman power in that book. And that's one of my favorite mysteries that I've created. I think the best book that I've written that has been published to date is Tag Me for Murder. I just like, I've like the light bulb went on. I like thought I knew what I was doing, and I really liked how I explored the characters in like their relationships and growing up, and so that one I think is my best written mystery.
This is number one in that series.
Yes, number one. Okay. Number two, I think, is the best book. And I'm going to be very honest. I thought the worst book that I've ever written was Over My Dead Blog, when it was written 4 years ago. So I'm really, really happy that I was able to take the time over the summer to bring it up to my standards. And at least based on the feedback that I'm getting from readers, I'm like, oh my God, I think I did it. I think I did something great. So I'm definitely excited to see where that goes. But you guys would not have been happy with it if you got it as is. So
well, and speaking of that book, I'm about halfway through. I heard a rumor that it is hitting the bookshelves sometime soon. You want to kind of give us some of the deets about that?
Super soon. It is launching on Tuesday, next Tuesday, Halloween, October 31st. It'll be available on ebook, paperback, Kindle Unlimited. It'll eventually be available on all platforms for audiobook. But that'll probably be a month, 2 months in the future. So I'm so excited to have this book out in the world because it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. Well, and I tell you what, folks, what I can tell you, at least so far, without giving away any of the plot, is the first line of my review is going to talk about how, Sarah, you are just an absolute wizard at stories with found family. Because this is another one when we've got Winnie and Owen and Bex and even Strider, and even though he's actually biological family. And you just write so beautifully about friendship and about looking out for those who are close to you. And so that's where I'm going to be leading off. I can't tell you how the rest of the review is going to go because I haven't finished the book yet, other than it will be 5 stars. I can guarantee that.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that you you really enjoy the relationships, because to me, that's always the heart of what I'm trying to capture. And especially with Winnie, she has a very tumultuous relationship with her brother. And for me, that was really hard to capture and figure out and navigate, because I've never really written sibling conflict before. So it was something new to explore, and I had a fun time doing it.
Well, and one of the things that I was really surprised at is how I reacted, and this doesn't give anything away. I'm not a real big fan of Bex right now because I didn't approve the way she was mean to Strider. And so it was just hey, you may be Winnie's friend, but give the guy a break here. And so hopefully that's just making you all more interested in finding out what the deal is with that. So for me, Bex is going to have to come around, and I'm sure she will. But when I read a certain scene, it's okay, she's being mean. I don't like it.
In defense of Bex, I've heard enough people, being from small town, growing up in a small town, living in these small towns when I was younger, you the condescension that some people from the big city always have to say. And Strider's comments sometimes, I'm oh gosh, he gets under my skin because he's got his little LA attitude going on. So Bex is there to put him in his place.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a city kid, not that Indianapolis is all that big, but so tell us about what do you have as far as release events, online, anything in person? What are you doing next week?
It's going to be a lot of popping around into different Facebook groups, connecting with folks. We had our kind of bookish moment already with Over My Dead Blog, and so I'm just really going to be just out there. I have an event coming up at a library in New York City where I get to go and talk about the modern sleuth and how amateur sleuth differs from your procedural detective, and so that'll be fun to share what's going on with all the women that I write about.
Yeah, nice. Very cool. Well, we're about out of time. I also want to mention one other thing real quick here. Another thing I want to shout out is this 4-comic series, The Great British Bump Off. It is a cozy mystery in comic book form. I've read it. It's delightful. So just a reminder, even if you know somebody who, you would love to get into mysteries or reading in general, and maybe they're I don't want to read books. I tell you, comics are an amazing art form in and of themselves, and so that's a little mystery one for you to check out.
I have that on my to read list because I mean, for folks that have joined us before, you know that I absolutely love manga and I'm just like always consuming it.
Yeah.
So that's one that's like definitely piqued my interest. And
Yeah.
yeah, like our hour just flew by.
It did.
Being bookish, we didn't really get to do, of course we got to talk about, you know, our recommendations for books, but since the last time we met, JC, any like TV shows, movies you want to shout out there?
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I mentioned it last time. I don't think so. Mrs. Sidhu Investigates. I'm going to mention that. That's on Acorn. That's a lot of fun. 50-something Indian widow investigates crimes, and it's fun. It's totally cozy mystery-ish with some serious social commentary about, you know, how women of a certain age are often erased. And so it's a lot of good stuff. So what about you?
I have been watching, so we've been doing scary movies left and right. We did a lot of this found footage stuff, but realized that we were getting like a little dizzy and motion sickness watching it. So we're watching, this one's on Peacock, and it's the TV show Creep Show that's based on the movie from the 80s. And it's just these 20-minute scary stories that are put together for I think they're 40-minute episodes. And they're really fun. They're like nothing too intense or like terrifying, but they're fun. They're a little spooky. So for the Halloween spirit, Creep Show has very much been enjoyable.
Nice. I will also mention, I have to, the best Halloween movie I've watched so far, and believe me, I've watched a lot, is Ginger Snaps. And it's a werewolf story featuring teenage sisters. And that's all I'm going to say. Canadian film, came out in 2000. I thought it was outstanding.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to note that.
Yeah, the gore is kind of mild, so it's not too bad. I mean, I was able to watch it. So if you're wanting something a little more kind of that monster movie, creature feature type of thing with a modern twist, check out Ginger Snaps.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to put that on. And so folks, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
I am seeing we've got some other comments. Mark is wishing you a happy belated birthday, JC.
Thanks, Mark.
David is saying the Ghost Trap has a community in suspense that takes place in Maine, where our thoughts are tonight. So the Ghost Trap, that's something that we can add to our reading list. Mizan is reading an advanced copy of Over My Dead blog and enjoying it. So I'm excited to hear that, Mizan. Thank you. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. We hope that you heard some good recommendations. If you haven't already read them, highly recommend every single book that we've mentioned tonight. And we really appreciate you being here with us as we kind of go through mysteries through the ages. And when we come back, our next episode, as my screen lights up here, is going to be November 9th. We're going to be joined by Mike Krentz. He's a fellow agency author that JC and I, both with our literary agency, so we'll be chatting with him about his book series on Thursday, November 9th. And we do have a couple episodes of the Bookish Moment, so make sure that you subscribe, and keep connected to our channel. But until then, everybody, stay bookish. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.